I don't know the July number. We'll all learn it in about a week or so. But I do think the odds favor a big increase in job creation and a big reduction in unemployment.
Well, if Larry Kudlow were a baseball player, that clip would be a swing and a miss. But it's become standard operating procedure at the White House these days. No matter how bad the news gets, act like everything is going great. But nothing is going great, as you know right now. Those job gains Kudlow was predicting didn't happen, not even close. In fact, almost 1.5 million new unemployment claims were filed last week. The second straight week that number has actually gone up over the prior one. And the 19th straight week the nation has seen more than 1 million people file for the very first time. Gross domestic product, which measures the nation's entire economic output, down nearly 10% in the second quarter, the single largest quarterly drop in American history. Stretch that out to a full year, it'd be a 33% drop. So essentially, a third of the American economy has vanished, all due to COVID. And the best way to fix the economy, it's getting consumers to spend more money, right? Well, that's not happening either. Consumer spending down 10% in the second quarter again, largest quarterly drop in American history. Now, we hear all the time that we've never seen anything like COVID before. That's certainly true, but we've also never seen an economy like the one we're looking at now either. Even the Great Depression, the worst economic period in American history, wasn't this bad. GDP from 1929 to 1933, it fell 30%. In our COVID economy, it has now fallen by 33%. And yet, with the need for help obvious for all to see, the Senate packed up and went home for the weekend without a deal for a new relief bill. So that extra $600 a week in unemployment, gone. That $1,200 check lawmakers were talking about, not coming. Extra funding for schools, cops, police, more, also unfunded. Lawmakers, they should be back to the negotiation table on Monday. If there is anyone who understands the intersection of government and the economy, it is our next guest, Sarah Bloom Raskin. She's a former governor of the Federal Reserve Board and a former Deputy Treasury Secretary, both under President Obama. I want to play a soundbite. We played one earlier, but another one, this from Larry Kudlow, talking about what kind of recovery he believes we're looking at.
There's a huge housing boom. There's a retailing boom. There's an automobile boom. Trucking is still very strong. I think the V-shaped recovery and the 20% second half growth is still very much intact.
Is it just me, or is there a major disconnect from reality here? They promised great numbers we were going to see this coming week. Never happened. In fact, Chairman Powell, talking out loud, really worried that with so many people out of work, and we gave the newest numbers, that if they don't have a job to go back to, forget V-shaped recovery, this is going to take a long while till America gets back on its feet.
Yeah, I think you've got it exactly right. Here in the U.S., we've got more than 30 million people looking for jobs, and there are not that many job openings. The last time data was put out on that, there were only about 5 million jobs for these 30 million people looking for jobs. So the unemployment situation is not looking promising. And of course, we know when people are unemployed, there are these collateral consequences. You know, you lose benefits, you have problems paying your rent, your mortgage, your utility bills, putting food on the table. I mean, there is a real hardship going on here that is indicative of this economic response to the pandemic. So there's trouble here, and whether there are some particular sectors that are showing little green sprouts, that might be great, but the overall picture here from an employment perspective is really quite grim. And at the same point, we're actually teetered here on a kind of fiscal cliff, because the benefits that were legislated in the CARES Act are due to expire tonight at midnight. And there is no deal yet that has emerged regarding what to do for financial assistance for people who cannot go back to work because those jobs are not there anymore.
You know, earlier in the week, Sarah, I opened up the phone lines, and specifically I was asking people, how worried they were in their household right now, and how many were teetering on the edge. And I know you know the number, but before COVID was even in the lexicon, 40% of Americans only had $400 of saving. So if the car broke down, somebody got sick in the family, there was no cushion. I heard some really frightening stories from people by just how close they were, how they already were dipping into savings, how really scared they were. And I saw another number the census did, how many people are worried about putting food on the table and how they're going without food even on occasion. I'm talking tens of millions of Americans. To that end, you know, if they don't pass the CARES Act, I'm not so sure people have their arms around in Washington just how razor's edge so many people are right now. The $600 doesn't come in. What do they do?
Yeah, you've hit it exactly right. There is a fragility in this economy, the likes of which we have not seen in our lifetimes before. And, you know, you talk about the inability to be able to put food on the table. You know, the food banks here are pushed to the max. I mean, it's a different kind of scene these days where you see people lined up in their cars, snaking around a big parking lot, waiting to get to the dispersion point for the food bank. These are very hard times, and you're right that they are hitting at a time of fragility. This pandemic came at a point where many people were living paycheck to paycheck, and the number of people who have already had their financial resources stretched thin is really quite high. And this then becomes the context for which the pandemic hits, and it hits at a very vulnerable point in terms of people's ability to weather shocks.
And you know, this idea that there's somebody else coming to the rescue, the states have no revenue coming in. And unlike the federal government, they got to make the math work at the end vis-a-vis their budgets. So they're stretched to the max, every governor I've spoken to. And this idea, I keep hearing it floating around like, hey, you know, some people are doing better sitting at home unemployed than when they were working. While I'm sure there's the equivalent of the welfare queen story that we can point to, it's just dumb economics to make that argument because they're putting the money back in the economy and it's a fraction of the bigger problem. Am I right here? If you could just explain the basic economics, it's better to not have people in desperation right now with a pandemic going on, give them just at least enough to keep the roof over their head and food on the table.
You're exactly right. You see, there will be cascading effects if people aren't able to make payments on things that they owe. We'll start to see defaults, delinquencies pile up, and also move through the economy, cascade in ways that the recipients of those funds themselves start to experience shortfalls. So the overall effect on the economy is one that is not good. So these payments need to, they need to be re-upped. And, this notion that people, that you hear from one side of the aisle that, that people are getting paid to sit around at home. First of all, that $600 payment was structured in such a way that it would incentivize people at a time when they were told they could not go to their jobs to stay at home. Well, you'll have to remember that at a certain point in the pandemic, people couldn't go to jobs. They were told you have to stay home. This isn't this is no time to moralize about people's, ability to want to work or not want to work. People want to work. We have seen experience with this $600 payment. It has not dissuaded people from going to jobs if they have them or if they can find new ones. And you also have to remember that there are no jobs to go to, or there are limited jobs to go to. So this notion that people aren't going to find work because they're better off staying at home is one that doesn't have a lot of traction in this particular environment.
Sarah Bloom Raskin, I appreciate a few minutes today. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Great being here.
All right, everyone, when we come back, we'll take a look at politics, 2020 vision, including Joe Biden. He's set to pick a VP next week. We'll give you the odds on who it might be, plus the latest threat to the November election, not at the polling places, but rather at the post office. We'll explain next.